Hello, everybody. You've tuned in to the Indiana State Police Roadshow. I'm your host, Sergeant Rich Myers with the Indiana State Police Public Information Office. We appreciate the Indiana State Police Alliance, Cops for Kids, subsidiary of the Indiana State Police Alliance, for their continued support of the show. We like to thank Tom Trial for putting us on YouTube each and every week and getting us out and about to the state of Indiana. And with me today, I have Isaac Randolph. Isaac is a new first-time guest of the show. Isaac, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
We appreciate you having us.
Appreciate it.
Isaac is the Director of Communications with the Indiana Department of Corrections. And we're talking about a subject today that has been around Indiana today, and we want to get some information out to the public. And Isaac was kind enough to come in here and talk to us about the situation out at the Putnamville Correctional Facility. But before we jump into that, Isaac, how did you get involved with the Indiana Department of Corrections?
Well, I took a very eclectic route here. I'm a retired firefighter with the Indianapolis Fire Department. Did 22 years, and probably would still be a firefighter had not then Governor Daniels, offered me a cabinet post. So
Okay.
I took that position, and then prior to the election, migrated over to the Department of Correction because I was an appointed position, and really found a home there. And through a series of collaborations and special projects, when an opening was made available to work for a very good guy, our chief communication officer, Doug Garrison.
Yeah.
I took advantage of that, and so it kind of brings me here today. But it's probably one of the most fascinating positions I've had, and this is including being a firefighter. I mean, the fact that I'm still engaged with managing both communications, information, and still on the cusp of emergency management is kind of a gift in my latter years, if you if you will, in my career. So really excited to be here. Really excited to be part of the Department of Correction family.
Well, we appreciate you coming in here and being with us today and talking about this situation that you folks have had for, I don't know, has it been a little over a week or longer? Maybe a week or two?
Well, based on the timeline, we have it around January 16th.
Okay.
And like most, folks probably don't know this, and I learned a lot in these last 2 weeks.
We were discussing off camera. You know more about the flu than you probably ever wanted to know in your life.
Wanted to know. I'm still not an epidemiologist, but I'm getting close. This started around January 16th.
Okay.
So now, for most people, may not know this, but you can have the flu,
All right.
be carrying the virus, but not present symptoms for another 4 to 5 days.
So you can have the virus inside you and
Yes.
not outwardly be presenting it.
Absolutely. You can be infected and not really know it. And so when those, we traced it back to the 16th when we first noticed that a significant number of our offenders were coming down with the flu-like symptoms, coughing, headache, high temperatures, etc. And it became, once we figured we had something beyond the normal for this time of year.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this is January. People are sick. The flu is already out there. But we started to notice some upticks in the number of offenders who were complaining. So immediately we began to pull things together and start assessing. We isolated those individuals and put them in the healthcare unit. We had one particular individual. He was a Mexican nationalist, and I say this to put it in context that he probably had some extenuating circumstances in his body that didn't bode well for him. And so he took a downturn, and he passed shortly thereafter. And so that really kind of brought attention to this situation. And the autopsy has suggested that he had MRSA, which, if you know about this debilitating disease coupled with the flu, it could be fatal. And what MRSA does is it depletes or inhibits the body from creating the white blood cells that allow us to fight infection.
Okay.
So this particular individual did not have enough white blood cells to fight off the flu, and he passed. And we had another one that was put in critical care unit at Terre Haute Regional Hospital, which great partners.
Yeah.
So at that point, we engaged the leadership of the facility, Superintendent Brian Smith, he reached out to us, and we engaged the Indiana State Department of Health, and we began to have a series of conference calls with the CDC to help determine. One of the things I found interesting is not all flus are alike, and so it's important for us to identify the proper strain to therefore put the proper remedies in place
to combat that flu.
Absolutely.
Because I think we hear that year after year. You get a flu shot, you may not have the flu shot for the correct flu.
Absolutely. And it just so happens, we were very fortunate. This was the H1N1, the same pandemic influenza virus that was around in 2009.
Okay.
So that was determined the Saturday night, which I believe was the 20th or 21st. And so it took us that long to determine the virus, the exact virus. But in the meantime, the superintendent cut off visitation, so we didn't want anybody coming in, family members with kids who are visiting loved ones, to take that home. We began aggressively looking at wiping down the common areas with bleach water, and then handing out masks for those who want it. Now, I found out in this process that for this particular virus, the masks weren't going to be that effective, but it was a comforting talisman, if you will. And then we instituted aggressive hand washing. We told all the offenders and staff, for that matter, to wash your hands aggressively.
Is that the most common way that you can do that?
Ironically, the things we learned in kindergarten.
Yeah.
You know, cover your mouth when you cough, washing your hands, wiping down things when in the common area. Those are the things that best combat the spread of the virus. And so those things were done aggressively. We switched out up to almost 100 air filters. You know, I mean, this is an old facility. It houses about 2,500 individuals plus staff, and the buildings are dorm buildings. Probably the worst case scenario when you're dealing with the spread of a virus, because your dorms, you're right there.
And you got a small city you're dealing with.
Yes, it is a small city. Its own power plant, its own food production, and most folks don't understand that our superintendents are some of the greatest managers in terms of fiscal and operational. They're like mayors of very small towns, mayors whose staff don't carry guns regularly, and yet we know every guy there is a bad guy, convicted. But they did a wonderful job, and I think, I mean, just the collaboration between the two agencies, the Indiana Department of Health and the Department of Correction, just shows the importance of working together, of professionalism, and I think that's where we were able to stop this in its tracks.
So you found out, and you started these measures to keep it in check. What exactly happened? Did you have to transport any prisoners off campus, or how did that work out?
There was a form of triage that was used. Certain individuals were kept in our healthcare unit. Okay. Number one, if they presented symptoms, we immediately moved them away from the general population.
Isolate from the general population.
They were put in the healthcare unit. They're monitored there, and if there's certain indications that things are getting worse, they are immediately transported to the Terre Haute Regional Hospital. And we had about, say, at the peak, we had 35 offenders.
Showing
signs and symptoms. About half of those were, or a little bit more than half, were housed at the facility, healthcare unit. And then a portion, say 12, I believe, were sent to Terre Haute Regional. 4 of those were in the ICU. They had exigent circumstances that required constant monitoring. So the beauty of it is, since then, that was the high water mark. Right now, we have approximately, and I checked these numbers this morning in preparation, 12, we have 15 under observation. That includes everyone. Okay. And about 4 are still at Terre Haute Regional Hospital. None in ICU. Good. So we're turning the corner on this, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, you're listening to the Indiana State Police Roadshow. I'm your host, Sergeant Rich Myers, with the Indiana State Police Public Information Office. I have Isaac Randolph, who's Director of Communications for the Indiana Department of Corrections. And we're talking about something that's been in the news here recently, and something that can happen to any city or any area there with close-knit schools, public schools, campuses, colleges, but it just happened to happen at the Indiana Department of Corrections. And I think something happened at the same time that may have thrown fuel on this fire,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
The turkey situation they had down in southern Indiana, did that have a play in it?
That had absolutely nothing to do with this particular virus other than circumstances. You had, perception was you're dealing with offenders, and we had a group, we were called, mobilized by the BOA, the Board of Animal Control.
All right.
To assist in the depopulation of turkeys that were infected with the avian flu virus. And this happened at the beginning of the year, about the second week. And so we have trained several, a couple of hundred offenders to go down and help and assist with the depopulation on several farms. And, to the person looking on the outside, you hear avian flu, you hear H1N1 flu virus,
right.
And it's a logical assumption that dealing with offenders and everything, that it's related. And the two things can be no more the same as a carrot would be to a steak.
Okay.
There's no connection, formal or informal. It was unfortunate circumstances, and it's easy to make that leap. So we don't castigize anyone saying, how dare you try to link these? It's a stupid idea. No.
Right.
It may, if you are not a part of the healthcare industry,
right.
If you're not an epidemiologist, and I'm
right.
not, it's easy to make that assumption. So there was no connection between the two. The depopulation went well. It was contained and eradicated, and this just happened to pop up. And I go back to something I said earlier. This is the flu season.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're going to have these outbreaks, and I think what made this probably a story. And it certainly was. Anytime you have someone who dies in custody, you do want the truth to get out. But the only circumstances that brought that on was the condition of the deceased having MRSA. So, no, there's no connection.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've talked about this off air before we came in. Most of your offenders are not in the best of health when they enter into your correctional facility.
Oh, absolutely. The interesting thing, and the ironic thing, if you will, is those who are incarcerated now are probably in the best health they've ever been. They're drug-free for the most part. They're not allowed to smoke. They're getting 3 square meals a day. They have health care on site. They're sleeping at regular hours, or supposed to anyway. Yeah. And so of course, we can't undo whatever they've been through in the past. If
Correct.
They were intravenous drug users, or they come in with a disease that can't be dealt with effectively. But for the most part, these folks, and one could argue that in terms of a flu, they're pretty isolated. That's a pretty isolated and insulated group. The only people coming in from the outside are the staff and their family members who are visiting these offenders. So these folks, if they're healthy, they typically stay healthy in terms of flu, just because there's just no way to interact with the public. And
I'm sure, we got about a minute and a half left, but I'm sure that you folks have flus every year.
Absolutely.
You have probably just normal like the regular population does. Again, it was just because of your unfortunate death, your timing of the incident down in southern Indiana that kind of was a perfect storm.
Absolutely. And I would say we took our time in identifying the flu. So there's certain elements in the media that wanted to dub this the mysterious flu-like symptoms. And we just wanted to be very careful in making sure we got the proper and accurate information out. So we took our time in identifying, and we're glad we did.
Yeah.
Because it allowed us to put the perfect remedy in place, which was the Tamiflu.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to the listeners out here, you can best combat it by washing your hands, using hand sanitizer, wiping down common areas, cover your mouth. All the things we learned in kindergarten. If you can take yourself back down to kindergarten and do those things, you should, and get vaccinated, most important.
Well, again, you listening to the Indiana State Police Roadshow, brought to you by the Indiana State Police Alliance. And thank you, Isaac, for coming in and explaining all this to us. And I'm glad you've turned the corner.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for listening to the Roadshow. We'll talk to you again next week. I thank Isaac for being in here today and talking about this incident at Putnamville Correctional Facility. Roadshow out.